G'day and welcome to another episode of the Aussie Ideas Man. Yet one more practice session. I've done well over 40 now and still no good at it. This time I'm going to talk about two particular items of news coming from Australian YouTubers, and I just think they are a little poor in some ways. The first one I think is very poor information and possibly misinformation. And this is by Sam, who comes from his site called the Electric Viking. And I'll go through that first, and then afterwards, the second one is from John Cadogan, whom I respect a lot with his engineering intelligence. And in this case, John has some staggering news from the government, and I wish to finish by saying what I think of this scheme that the government has come up with. In either case, John's video is excellent, especially for Australians, and I recommend people watch all of it. It is very important. It's probably more important than people make out and would think. We had a change of government where the prior government was pretty poor on giving any benefits or incentives for buying EVs, and this change of government has now done something, but I don't think they've done it right. Anyway, I'll keep going. So I'll start with Sam from the Electric Viking and just try to stop as I watch his pieces and make a few comments as to why this is poor news.
I said this would happen in about a year or two's time. Really, I was wrong. Clearly, once again, it happened quicker than I predicted. Electric cars available right now, as in today, are already cheaper in China in many cases than gasoline-powered cars. But the same thing has just started happening in many other countries around the world. This is one of the best reviewed electric cars in the last 2 years anywhere in the world. And the price is cheaper than many comparable gasoline-powered cars. Matt Watson from CarWow, he said the best car he's driven this year, all year, was the MG4 electric hatchback. Well, now, MG have just reduced the price to truly ridiculous levels. Honestly, how they can sell these at this price, I don't know. But if you are the competition, you've got to be quaking in your boots. I mean, seriously, this price is ridiculous. But it proves what I've been telling you now for a long time. Electric cars are going to come down in price dramatically. MG has dropped the price to below 20,000 euros. It's actually 19,300 euros in Europe, which is an absolute bargain. So for some context, that is 29,900 Australian dollars, or about 19,800 US dollars. Yeah.
Okay, so far he's talking about England. In Britain, this MG4 has had what he calls a massive price reduction, but he also says that it's now comparable to many ICE cars in England, and it's not. It's still much dearer than comparable cars, but he never lets the facts get in the way of a good story. But in Australia, I'm 69 years old, and I have very rarely seen anything drop in price. It's just not something that happens across the board in Australia. And this, what I call bad information, hinges on his predictions that in Australia, which we don't even have the car here yet, but in Australia, when it comes, he's going to predict that it is at a much cheaper price. The average EV, like the MG ZS EV, is upward of $45,000. The BYD Atto is around the same price, and they're amongst the cheapest EVs in Australia. things like the Tesla Model 3, 70,000 plus. But anyway, I'll watch him a little further.
Yeah, incredible. It's my mind's blown. Any of those countries will have affordable EVs within the next few years. It's just inevitable. It makes complete sense. You don't even have to put two and two together. It's obvious what's about to happen. I think it's pretty obvious here. This is the car that proves what I've been saying for a while now. It wouldn't be long until electric cars were on par with gasoline powered cars. There's so many cars right now for sale in Europe right now, in Australia right now, which cost more than this, right? Cost more than this and are pretty much identical in terms of specs and size. Have a think about that. We're already there. People don't listen. They keep telling me EVs are going up in price. Well, guess what? Buy one of these. You're going to get one of these for a cheaper price than an equivalent gasoline powered car. And as you know, I'm confident Tesla's new Model 2 will also be a similarly priced, affordable car. I think the interior of this car doesn't look budget at all. That's just my take. What's your take on this? Would you consider one of these for 19,000 US dollars or 29,000 Australian dollars? Personally, I think it's a no-brainer. I am very optimistic about EVs. I'm optimistic about this car, and I'm optimistic, in fact, I'm rationalistic about the reality, which is electric cars will come down in price.
Okay, so he's finished his spiel, and he's been saying that he expects the MG4, when it comes out next year, to be $29,000, thereabouts. $29,000. Now, this is why it's bad news and probably misinformation, because I went to the library and pulled out a recent Wheels magazine that was highlighting the 30 or so cars that were coming out soon, and the MG4 was estimated to be $45,000. This is our one. I think we only have about 2 motoring magazines, but they are the experts. They're not YouTubers, they're the experts, and they estimate the price to be $45,000. Now, there's a huge gap between $29,000 and $45,000. And if somebody's going to put out news that he expects the MG4 to be $29,000 and that EVs in general will all drop in price, I think it's misinformation. It's pretty poor. So I'll go on to the next person.
If you're on a salary in Australia and you've been thinking about buying your very first electric car, the thing that's probably held you back to this point is the staggering cost of EV ownership when you compare it to a more conventional car. New legislation, which passed through the Parliament on Monday, is set to radically reduce the cost of EV ownership and remove this barrier to acquisition, potentially for you. So if you've been sitting on this fence, maybe it's time to go a bit Humpty Dumpty. In this report, I'm going to show you exactly the recipe for Australia's cheapest electric car omelette. Let's talk legislation. Now, I normally don't jump out of bed and go, legislation, let's go. But in this case, it is actually pretty exciting, okay? The Albo government managed to pass a thing called the Treasury Laws Amendment Electric Car Discount Bill 2022 on Monday through both houses, so it's legislation now, and it's also backdated to the 1st of July, in case you were interested. According to the government, quote, the bill exempts certain electric vehicles from fringe benefits tax. For eligible vehicles, this will result in a significant cost reduction. So let's talk about that. What are these eligible vehicles and which ones are subjected to fringe benefits tax? And how can you leverage this to get the EV that you've been fantasizing about at a, quote, significant cost reduction? So it's for battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids under about $85,000.
I'll just pause here because possibly a lot of people from around the world would not know what the Albo government is. It's not the elbow on your arm. It's Albo as in Anthony Albanese. and that's his nickname, Albo. And he is the Prime Minister of Australia, and I should say the new Prime Minister in the change of government we recently had.
Actually $84,916, which is the luxury car tax threshold for fuel-efficient vehicles in Australia. Okay, so, and it has to be under a salary sacrifice or novated leasing arrangement. They're the same thing, salary sacrifice, novated leasing, because that's where the fringe benefits tax imposition takes place, all right? If you're on a salary, you are pretty much eligible for a novated lease or a salary sacrifice car. You don't have to use the car at all for business use. This can be 100% private use, and you still get the tax benefit, which is kind of unheard of, right? So the way I read the legislation, it represents sort of up to a $6,000 windfall if you're the right person. And it essentially means that a car like a rear-wheel drive Tesla Model 3 is going to be about the same price as a Corolla SX hybrid. The same price in the context of the impost on your take-home pay, like the reduction in your take-home pay in exchange for one of those two cars, okay? Let's not forget, though, that the Model 3 is like just shy of 70 grand, whereas the SX Corolla hybrid is like 37, something like that. So this is a way of stimulating mainstream EV acquisition, and if you're the right person, it's a no-brainer. Now, for expensive EVs over that quasi $85,000 threshold, the standard fringe benefits tax imposition is going to pertain. So the government's not really backhanding the rich too hard here, because if you're going to buy a $100,000 EV, you're going to pay the full whack of FBT. That's still...
Okay, this is where I think he should have given a little more information. He's happy that it's not favouring the rich, but the problem is, and he's been saying, if you're eligible, you can have this. What that means is, for those that are ineligible, and there are plenty of those, they can't have it either. And so what it does is favour a small portion of the population. It actually gives a great advantage to just a minority group. Now, I'm not sure how many people qualify for salary sacrificing. Not sure at all. It may be, I'm guessing, something like 20% of workers. So that makes a big difference. Now, his reporting is excellent, except for that very fact that he only says if you qualify, this is great, and doesn't say that there's inequity in the scheme. Other than that, I really like his report.
Going to be happening. But if you want one of these more affordable EVs, then it just got a whole lot more affordable. Now, the vehicle packaging schedules that they produced for me, I'll make them available to you. You can look at them up on the screen now, okay? The Model 3 and the Corolla that I just talked about. And this whole scenario is based on an $80,000 salary for dudes and dudettes like you, and 20,000 kilometres of annual driving. So you don't have to be the chief operating officer of the company. You can just be an ordinary employee, and you can see how this plays out. It's actually $208 a week for out of your take-home pay for the Tesla, and $209 for the Corolla. So technically less for the Tesla, but $1 a week. Let's call it the same, okay? And let's focus on the difference in the price, because it's $68,000 for the Tesla and $38,000 or something for the Corolla hybrid, right? This is the SX hybrid. If you want to buy a conventional car with a novated lease, you're on 100K and the vehicle costs 74, then the benefit to you from novated leasing, salary sacrificing, is about $3,800. If you want to do exactly the same thing with a battery EV or a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, the benefit to you is more like $9,800. So that's a massive inversion of the status quo. $6,000 different. You're buying a car for the same value. Is a much bigger benefit to you if you buy the battery EV or the plug-in hybrid EV with a salary sacrifice now. And it's really important to realise this. Otherwise, if you just sign across on the dotted line now without really being aware of the nuts and bolts of this legislation, you could be doing yourself a massive disservice. But the difference, $6,000, is kind of not something you see governments handing out all the time, especially for private vehicles, vehicles that don't do any business use. It's a massive potential saving, right? If you're on an $80,000 salary with a Model 3 in mind, like the rear-wheel drive Model 3 we just talked about, the difference in your take-home pay between no car in the driveway and Model 3 in the driveway, $208 a week, and it's going to cost you the same to put a hybrid Corolla in the driveway, and what would you rather see in the driveway? Okay? And these are both examples that are based on a 5-year lease and 20,000 kilometres per year. With this new arrangement, it's a lay-down misere. It's like very hard for me to see a situation where a mainstream EV can be had more cheaply any other way, including redrawing your own mortgage or just paying cash for it, like just getting the money out of the bank and paying for it. When you look at the all-up cost, it's much cheaper. And the question is not, is novated leasing right for me in this situation? It's like, how much am I going to save over the alternative methods of acquisition, right? But I would say, but the beauty of doing it this way is that it reduces your taxable income, and some of the money that you would have otherwise paid in tax actually gets translated into a tangible benefit, the car, in your driveway. All of the costs basically can be put into the package and paid for with the one deduction out of your pre-tax salary. So that's a pretty good deal for some people. The benefits of novated leasing, just to be completely clear on this, the new FBT exemption, that's huge. If you buy a mainstream EV with a novated lease, you're not going to pay that fringe benefits tax at all. Big fat zero, dude. Makes a huge difference to the bottom line. So that's benefit number one. And benefit number two is you don't pay the GST on the vehicle. Okay. There's no way that I can see, that I'm aware of, for an employee to get out of paying the GST on a new car without being in a salary sacrifice arrangement. It's a remarkably good deal, okay? So it lowers your taxable income, like we discussed, and it means that some of the money that we all begrudgingly pay to the government for taxation can be translated into a tangible asset in your driveway. Okay, so it lowers your taxable income, which is a positive thing, and you get a vehicle in your driveway in exchange, which is even more positive. And there's a residual that you can pay at the end if you want to hang on to it, or you can give it back and go again at the end of the term. It really is quite flexible like that, and it depends whatever the contract says. I just suggest that this is going to cause an absolute avalanche of demand for EVs, because there are all kinds of barriers to entry into all kinds of different things, but the one significant barrier to EV ownership is the price. It's been prohibitive for some time. Like the fully loaded Kona EV is like 50% more. This is a huge additional impost to ordinary people. But if you're a mum or a dad on a salary, $25,000 extra for a car, which is kind of the ballpark we're talking about, that's hugely significant. And what the Albanese government has essentially done with this Treasury Laws Amendment Electric Car Discount Bill 2022, what a mouthful, is reduce that barrier to zero for a great many ordinary Aussies. And if you're one of them, you've been sitting on the fence, now's the time, dude.
Okay. I had a big coughing fit while watching him at the end. I shouldn't have been eating those peanuts before doing this talking. Well, I don't like having to chop him up so much, but he had a really thorough go at explaining this government incentive, and I had to keep it short, otherwise I might be in trouble for plagiarism or whatever it's called. Doesn't matter. I do recommend you watch everything that he does on his own channel. You can see it there. It's called Electric Vehicles Just Got Thousands Cheaper for Ordinary Australians. Unfortunately, he doesn't mention that it is just for a few ordinary Australians and not everybody. And this is where I'd like to have that shot at government. At 69 years old, I have seen so many government schemes that have been absolutely silly. And the worst thing about them is that they've been unfair to the general population, that they favour some and others just get nothing out of it, and sometimes actually bear the brunt of the added costs of the scheme. It started when I was about 11 or 12 years old, and the government decided that they would subsidise the installation of gas in cars. So installers were putting cylinders in the boots of cars, and people were using gas because it was so much cheaper than petrol or diesel. And well, for those Americans, I'm talking about natural gas, not gasoline. You call petrol gasoline. In Australia and England, we call our gas petrol, and we call real gas gas. Unfortunately, you're going to have to figure out the difference. So anyway, natural gas was being installed in tanks in the boots of cars. That's the trunk for Americans. And the government decided we can offer an incentive. It was somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500 at the time, many years ago. It was a big incentive which got lots of people installing them. What resulted was the installers jacked up their prices by the amount that the scheme was offering. So it was the installers that all got rich. It favoured the installers, but it got people thinking they're getting, between $1,000 and $1,500 for nothing. So they started installing the gas. Then what happened was the government started adding, because there were more people buying gas, the government started adding tariffs and taxes to the gas price. So the government was making money, and that's the whole idea. Many, many years ago, the government stopped serving the people and just decided to start ripping them off. And this was a good example of it. So the scheme was a failure. Now, I've seen many other schemes since then. There were schemes for installing insulation bats into the roofs of houses, and that failed. It once again was used as an agent to rip off the public, so that the public wasn't getting the benefit of the scheme, but the installers and the sellers of the insulation bats were ripping it off, just the same as the installing of gas in cars. Now let me think, what other schemes? Oh yes, there was the scheme where they wanted people to take out medical insurance, private medical insurance. So they decided a small percentage of tax on people who didn't do it. Well, I knew how bad it was because I'd seen many, many of these schemes and decided, what the heck, I was working back then. I'm retired now. But back then I said, no, I'll just pay the extra tax. I'm not joining a private medical scheme. And over the next, maybe 4 to 8 years, the private medical benefits providers, they jacked up their prices so far that there were mass resignations from them. People had paid through the nose and just could not afford to do it any longer. And just had to opt out, cut their losses, and pay the tax like I was doing, and other smarter people who would never trust government for any of their silly schemes that they come up with. Unfortunately, when I look at my computer screen, I actually go blank and forget some of these schemes. There was one for water tanks in the backyard and all sorts of other things, but let me try to think. What scheme can I think of? Doesn't matter. Probably too long now. I'll cut to this one and say, okay, now maybe 20%, I don't know, could be up to 30% of ordinary people will be able to rake in a $30,000 windfall. But even more than that, John Cadogan didn't enter into the fact that their running costs are now between a quarter and a third the costs of driving an ice car had they bought one. And so they benefit there because they're not trying to recoup that extra money that they paid over the price of an ice car. They're already line ball with the price of the ice car, and so now they're not recouping. They're making money on the fact that they don't buy petrol and diesel at the high prices that we have. They're using electricity from their solar panels and probably not paying anything at all. Well, what's going to happen in this scheme is that there will be a rise in the sale of EVs. And just like every other scheme, those people selling the EVs, contrary to what Sam is saying, are now going to start jacking up the prices of EVs. They'll do that because people will still figure out that they're getting money for nothing from the government and they'll jump in on it. So EVs are about to rise. And so then, say it's 70% of ordinary people aren't able to access this scheme because they can't salary sacrifice. They will then bear the brunt of those price rises. It's a scheme that's going to be a failure. And it's one more scheme, again, that is inequitable, unfair, and government should not favour small portions of the community. They should do things that are equitable, that are fair to all, and they just fail at it time and time again. I have grown to have a complete dislike for what governments do because they are so inept. They are incapable of doing anything properly. And so that's the main part of my video. The rest of the world can laugh at Australia. We are ridiculously inept when it comes to governing, and we are the laughing stock of the world. Prior to this, some state governments down south were actually adding taxes for EV owners because they weren't paying the fuel excise. So they decided, what the heck, we'll tax them. They'll have to log their mileage, and they input that at tax time, and we'll tax them depending on how far they've driven, so that they can pay some taxes for the roads. This is how inept we are. Those governments, I think, are still doing it. I think it's New South Wales and Victoria. But now the federal government has decided to do something to encourage EV uptake, and they've botched it. They've botched it badly. I'll leave it at that. That's all from me. Until next time. I do have something in the pipeline. I had a big problem, which included problem with government, for 2 months. It got resolved, but I still think Australians need to hear about that. And in the next week or two, I hope to bring that one out. But until then, bye for now. Stay safe.